What am I saying again?
This is MPW,
MPW.
the podcast
with your host,
Xylo Aria. Cool.
A podcast about music production
for the everyday musician,
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the MPW podcast. I'm your host, Xylo Aria, and today we are really lucky to be joined by Anna Bond. So Anna has worked across loads of different parts of the music industry. So she was the US General Manager for Rough Trade Records and also the label manager for Fat Cat, has done lots of work across artist management and is currently the head of creative and partnerships at Songtrust. So great to have you with us today, Anna. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, excited to have you here today as well. And we're talking about a topic that I find very confusing. So I'm very keen to have you clarify a few things for me personally, and I'm sure our audience as well. So we're talking about copyright, publishing, what you need to do as a kind of songwriter and also a producer and things to make sure that you're kind of on top of all that, to make sure that you're not missing out on any money that you could be earning from your music. But before we jump into that, Anna, I'd love to hear a bit more about you and how you got to doing what you're doing now and you know, worked across so many parts of the industry. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I just moved to New York in 2003. Oh my gosh, I'm obviously dating myself, but I got an internship at a record label, and turns out the person who ran it was like extremely difficult to work for. So people kept leaving and I kept getting their jobs. So I ended up kind of the assistant label manager for this label that had some pretty big artists, a very small team. I eventually left, but in between starting as an intern and doing mailings and leaving as, you know, the assistant label manager, I learned, you know, how to be a label manager. And I, you know, did marketing at some online retailers. I've been in distribution, but, you know, I really love record labels. So I was label manager for Fat Cat Records, which is a Brighton UK based label for their US office. And I worked with artists like Animal Collective and Frightened Rabbit and Twilight Sad and and Moom, just a lot of like really amazing, like genius weirdos doing, you know, rock of various experimental levels. And, you know, it's been a total learning experience, but I just kind of fell into it. Like I majored in Latin in college. But it was just, I didn't even realize, like, I'm from a small town in California, and I've always been into I was into college radio when that was a thing, and like independent music, and I would like special order CDs from the independent record store. And I didn't even really think about the fact that a record label was a job you could have, or that the music industry was a place for jobs. So then I found out, and here we are. Many years later, so many.
Awesome. No, that's really cool. And I love the fact that you don't have to know that you're going to end up in the music industry, you know, when you first start, especially when you're kind of working out what to study and just kind of work your way into it. Because I feel like there's so much pressure at that time when you're a bit young to kind of know what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life.
It's wild to expect, you know, a 21-year-old to know, 22-year-old to know, you know, this is my career path and I want to do it forever, because I don't think I knew anything when I was 22.
Yes. No, I completely agree. And yeah, I mean, probably our listeners know this already, but I started my career in corporate accounting, and that was, you know, very, very different to what I'm kind of doing now. And yeah, so it's now I feel like if I see people that are kind of freaking out about that, I'm like, just you'll figure it out, you know.
Totally.
And there's not all that pressure at the start. So that's great. So if we jump into talking about copyrights and kind of what to think about, maybe it would be helpful if you start with telling us what are the different types of copyright that a person has after writing and recording a song, and what do they have to do to secure those rights?
Sure. So there's a few ways of looking at it, but a copyright itself is like a bundle of rights that you have. And if you own it, you have the right to do things like distribute a work, perform it publicly, stuff like that. But if you record a song that you wrote, you have the rights of the recording, which is often called the master recording, and you have the rights of the composition, the song, or the publishing, whatever you want to call it. But it's basically, you imagine a circle, and 50% of the circle is the recording and 50% is the composition. It's these two different types of rights that you, as the person who both recorded and wrote the song, then have. You can imagine there's a lot of ways that those rights can be kind of sliced and diced. Say you are signed to a record label, they might own the recording, you might have written the song. If you cover a song, you might own the recording, but someone else owns the song. So there's a lot of different iterations, but at the very basic, it's like if you on your phone record a voice memo of a song that you just wrote, that you own the copyright automatically. And that is the composition side, which is what publishers deal with, and then the recording side, which is what distributors and record labels deal with.
Okay, right. All right. So you mentioned, and I just want to clarify this point because I feel like there's a bit of confusion around it, is that you don't have to do anything to have these rights. You don't have to email the song to yourself or something like that. It's just there, is it?
Yeah, once you fix a work in a tangible form, and that can be writing the song lyrics down on a piece of paper, it can be recording a demo, anything you do that is you making a tangible physical reality of a work, then you own it. There are reasons you might register a song with the Copyright Office of your country, but owning the copyright and having the rights to that song or that work, you don't have to register anything or do the poor man's copyright of like mailing yourself a letter or any of that stuff. You automatically own it. You don't get any money from it, and you don't get famous from it if you just let it sit on your phone in a voice memo, but you do own it.
Yeah. Okay. All right, cool. So we've got written a song and recorded it, and we have then the recording and the composition rights as a creator of that work. And so now we have these two types of rights. And how would you monetize those two rights, or what options do you have?
Okay, so you have a lot of options. Now, people tend to understand the recording side better because it's like you could use someone like a CD Baby, a TuneCore, DistroKid. You distribute the song. It is on Spotify. It's on Apple Music. If you make physical copies, that's all going to be monetized really obviously and really straightforwardly by your distributor or your record label, right? So you could sell those rights to your record label, essentially license them, whatever, or you could distribute it yourself, and then you're going to get paid back, on a monthly or quarterly basis based on how many streams, how many physical sales. And that's going to be representative of the recording. That is way more straightforward. And as someone who used to be at record labels, I can tell you for sure, it is way more straightforward. It's not easy. Launching artist careers and like monetizing your work is not easy, but it is just kind of logistically, you're like, okay, I go through my distributor, they send it to Spotify, Spotify sends them money, they send me money. That's how it goes. It's pretty easy. So on the composition side, it's a little more complex, but it is not impossible to understand, even though many people think it is. There's two different types of rights within the composition side, right? So we're already kind of like splitting the half circle again. There are performance rights and there are mechanical rights. Performance rights generate performance royalties. And a really easy way to think about this is if you literally go to a venue and you play the song, it will generate performance royalties. You performed it. There are other ways to think about public performance, like if the song is played on the radio, if it's played at like a big gym or like a cafe or a restaurant. Anytime this song is being, performed, whether it's live or a recording of the song in a public place, that earns a performance royalty. And those are collected by a certain type of organization. I won't get ahead of ourselves. And then there are the mechanical rights. And, mechanicals are called that because they were actually invented in the days of player pianos. So the songwriters of all the popular songs of the day were mad that people were profiting on these player piano rolls of their songs without them making any money. And so mechanical, because it was a mechanical process, became the name for this type of right. So it's basically the right to physically or digitally reproduce a song. So either a download, an LP, a cassette. Streams are weird. They have both performance and mechanical aspects, but it's a different type of right, and it is often collected by a different type of organization. Someone like your PRO, if you're with BMI or ASCAP in the US, or you're with APRA, is going to collect your performance royalties. In some cases, you have organizations that do both. In the US, it's a little weird, I think, just maybe because there's so many songwriters, 'cause it's such a big country. It tends to be very divided up. So you have organizations who collect performance royalties. And if you think about it, they're doing different work. They're monitoring radio stations. They're checking in with rock venues to see what music they're playing on stage and what they're playing in between bands. And then with mechanicals, it's what are the streaming numbers? What are the physical sound scan numbers? It's a totally different type of data. So public performance earns you a performance royalty. And then mechanical reproduction, whether that's digital or physical, earns you a mechanical royalty. And ultimately, those two together are publishing royalties. And as a songwriter, you have both of those rights, and you want to make sure you're collecting on both of those types of royalties. Was that too much?
No, that was really good. That was really good. So I'll just clarify now what this looks like in my head. So we have a giant pie, which is our song, with the recording and the kind of songwriting of it. Split that in half. We've got that split into the recording rights and the composition rights.
Yes.
And then the half of it is split further into half. So we've got 2 quarters. And one of them is the performance rights, which is if you play it at a venue, if the song is played at any venue, it doesn't have to be live. So that's the performance rights. And then the second quarter within the half is the mechanical rights. And that, I think, is the one that I'm least clear about.
Sure.
But so you said that is reproduction of the song, either physically or streamed. So do things because I'm trying to think, what other ways are there to reproduce a song, like CDs?
Any physical
The
reproduction.
printing of them? Yeah. Okay.
Or
All right.
downloads or streams.
Okay. Downloads or streams. Because, okay. And this is where you said that Spotify and that kind of thing sort of comes with recording rights and the mechanical rights, because you've got, the recording of it being distributed. Okay, I think that's more clear than it has been in my head for a long time, Anna. So that's great.
So for example, let's say you signed to a record label and you released an album and they made we sold 5,000 physical LPs of the record that you made that was all songs that you wrote. So they would have to pay you. There's a specific rate for mechanical royalties. In the US, it's 9.1 cents per song. They would have to pay you 91 cents per LP sold as the songwriter. But as the performing artist, you're also getting whatever your royalties are due in your record contract. So if you can be a performing songwriter, you then get both pieces of the pie. But say you're a producer and you're getting songwriting credit for a song that someone else is recording and releasing, you might not be getting any points on the recording side. But if you have 25% of that song, you're still going to get your portion of mechanical and performance royalties whenever that song is streamed, whenever that LP is sold, whenever the song is played on the radio, or when that performer plays the song live. You still get your piece of that song.
Okay. So one thing you mentioned there, which I thought was interesting, was that there is a set fee for the mechanical rights. So that doesn't change no matter who you are or if you have a label or not and all that. And then the recording rights, I guess that just depends how well your song does.
Yeah, it depends
Yeah.
on the deal that you have with your distributor or your label. And for songwriting, for publishing, in the US specifically, the Copyright Board sets this statutory rate, and that's what it's called, right? It's what you have to pay to duplicate someone's song, essentially. Streaming is a lot more complex because it's kind of based on the amount of revenue that each DSP streaming service makes, and then it's kind of divided by the number of writers and the number of times their songs are streamed. So they don't have a statutory rate, but for physical product, obviously not as big of a deal as it was in the past. And for downloads, it's that 9.1 cents in the US. Other places have different rules.
Okay. And what about the other quarter, which is the performance rights? Are they set a thing as well? No.
They are not. And performance royalties they're kind of the most mysterious part of publishing because there are so many different ways to earn them. There are so many different places. I mean, you're talking radio stations all over the world, right? So I don't know, 100,000 radio stations. I don't know how many there are. That might be a lot more than there really are. But even in the US, you're talking thousands of radio stations, and every time they play your song, that's a performance royalty that goes into your line item. Satellite radio, Pandora or other digital streaming radio. And, anytime it's played at a venue, if the DJ plays it at a set, and it varies with the size of the audience for a venue. It depends on, how many potential listeners there were on that moment at the radio station, right? Like if you're played on a radio station in LA versus if you're played on a radio station in Missoula, Montana, the LA play gets you more money, right? Depending on, the station. You won't get any money if it's a nonprofit college station. So there are all these different considerations, and it depends on the size of the audience and the potential audience. You receive a performance royalty if, say, you have a song that's a soundtrack to a Netflix show. Every time that show is streamed, you get a tiny little micro penny line item. But all of the PROs calculate that stuff a little bit differently. In some cases, they're going to require a threshold above which you get paid. In some cases, it's just going to be a kind of direct ratio of number of plays on Netflix or plays on the radio or whatever. And different countries have very different rates too. So for example, in the US, if you go on a tour and you're not playing arenas, your performance royalties are going to be pretty negligible because of the way that the PROs are set up with the venues and how they report and how they deal with things. But if you play, say, in the UK and you play, a 100-person club, you could make £30. Whereas in the US, you wouldn't see anything. I don't even think they'd probably report it. So it totally depends also on the country, the region, the specific organization that's doing that reporting and collection. So performance does seem more complex because it kind of is. Mechanicals are pretty complex too, but performance is definitely the one that seems like it has the most magic in it. And I hate to tell you, but our pie has to get divided more because our performance quarter is divided into the writer share and the publisher share. And that means if you sign a publishing deal or you sign with an administrator like Songtrust, they will go out and get your publisher share. They'll register your song and get your publisher share, but the writer share will always come directly to you.
Okay. So if you didn't register with Songtrust or something similar to collect the publisher's share, then what happens to that?
So that's a really good question. And that also depends on where you are. So if you're in the US, which I use it as an example because it's where I'm from, but also it's the most simple, you would sign up with the PRO, which is a performing rights organization. And as their name implies, they handle only performing rights and performance royalties. So if you sign up with them, if you have a song that is distributed on Spotify and is maybe on the radio a little bit, if you sign up with only a PRO, you will receive your performance royalties. You will not receive your mechanical royalties.
Okay.
And in order to collect your mechanical royalties, you need to sign up directly with mechanical organizations or work with a publisher or administrator who can kind of handle that stuff for you. And you can kind of see how it might get complex if you are a global artist, right? Ideally, you'd sign up everywhere you have significant royalty earnings directly so that you could kind of get that direct revenue and there wouldn't be kind of all these twists and turns before it gets to you. But that would, automatically kind of become a full-time job because the music industry is so globalized that, once you're up to like 10 PROs or CMOs, which is the other type of collection organization, that would be a full-time job and you wouldn't even be able to make music anymore.
Okay. Interesting. So we've got the composition side.
Yes.
So to get the writer's portion of the performance right, which is an eighth of the pie now.
It's an eighth, yes.
That just happens automatically. I guess you have to register with your
PRO
so that
with the
they
rights
have your
organization.
details. And then they also can collect your publishing rights, which is the other eighth of the pie that makes up your performance rights. And then for that last quarter, which is the mechanical rights, you said that you need to sign up with another kind of publisher or what were they called again?
So it depends on, unfortunately, there are a lot of different names for different organizations that collect mechanicals.
Okay.
So in some cases, you'll have like APRA AMCOs, right? Where they're collecting, they're merged. So they're collecting the performance and the mechanicals together. And PRS, MCPS in the UK are similar. Like you kind of sign up with them as like a bundled package. In the US, it's very different. You're going to have your PRO, which is your BMI or your ASCAP, and then you're going to need to sign up with other organizations who are collecting those royalties from DSPs, and DSP means digital service provider. It basically means Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, etc. They're collecting those royalties from DSPs and then paying them over to you. There are multiple organizations collecting mechanical royalties in the US alone, right? We have the MLC, which is the Mechanical Licensing Collective, which just launched at the beginning of this year. And its mission is to, get all those royalties that are kind of hanging out that nobody has asked for yet and get them to songwriters, which is very exciting. And they're already doing incredible work. But there's also the Harry Fox Agency, and there are other sources that will work with Harry Fox. And then there's Music Reports, which is also called MRI. And for example, they tend to work with TikTok. So if you're getting TikTok royalties, you're going to need to sign up with them so that they can license your song to TikTok so that you can collect those royalties. And you can kind of imagine, like, if there are already 3 of these major mechanical rights organizations or mechanical collection organizations in the US, then if you're talking about all over the world, it's kind of a lot. And they do have reciprocal deals, which means that like the one in Spain might pay over to the one in the US and vice versa. But those are a little unreliable depending on who you're talking about. And that's only because publishing is such an old industry that a lot of the organizations, especially kind of in smaller territories, don't have like the latest technology and might be using kind of older tech or older methods to, transmit data, transmit information. They might be using different data formats. And so it is really easy for royalties to kind of get lost in that translation between one country and the other, which is why it's great to have someone, either, a traditional publisher or an administrator who's going to have direct relationships with all of those organizations and can kind of make sure they all get your data at the same time.
Okay. So is there someone that does that, get all the data at the same time?
Yes. I mean, the company I work for, Songtrust, does that.
Yeah.
And a publisher, if you signed with like a big publisher like Sony or, signed with a Cobalt, they're going to do your administration as well, in addition to kind of creative services like pitching your songs and pitching for sync. So publishing administration is really the work of taking your song information and then sending it out to all of these different potential collection sources all over the world to make sure that you collect, every little micro penny for every radio play, every stream you get in every country.
Okay. So And just to be clear, when we're talking about collecting publishing rights or just because we hear kind of just music publishing a lot. So when we talk about that,
Yeah.
is it just the kind of 1/8 of the pie that we're talking about, which is the half of the sort of performance rights, or no?
That's a good question.
more than
That and it is confusing. The terminology we use. Publishing is the same as composition. It just means music publishing is simply all of the rights that a songwriter has or the owner of a song has. So if you write a
Okay.
song and you sell your publishing to someone, they now have your publishing rights.
Right. Okay. All right. And then when you were saying that there are people that would look after your whole publishing rights, which I'm going to now assume means like all your composition rights, there are the kind of Sonys and the Cobalts, and then the Songtrust, and that's available to everyone.
Yes.
And you can kind of sign up and you will take care of that.
Exactly. That is what we do.
Okay, all right. Is that available to everyone outside the US as well?
Oh yeah,
Or-
absolutely. We
Yeah.
have a ton
Okay.
of Songtrust clients from, I think we have songwriters in 145 countries.
Okay, right. Okay, that's huge.
Yeah, it's a lot.
All right. So then I guess to make sure that you are not losing out on anything, what would you recommend for a maybe self-producing artist to do?
So are we starting at the level of you just wrote and recorded a song yourself
Yes.
in your studio? So I would recommend, I'm not going to go into like career advice, but I will. I have a lot of opinions. If you want to get your song out there or your EP or your record or whatever, there are so many great, easy, universally accessible online distributors. CD Baby is part of the Songtrust family of companies. We've also worked with DistroKid, Symphonic, TuneCore. Like there are so many options and they all have kind of different payment schemes. Like in some cases you'll pay a flat fee. In some cases it'll be a percentage. And, it's just like choose who you trust, look at their website, see what they're telling you and, what kind of economic model you want. And you can just do it. Like just get your music out there. Like try not to let the cover art be super ugly. Like try to make it cute. That's really important to me. Can you
good.
see in my eyes that I've like been through some stuff with cover art?
I have heard this from a couple of people actually, that they're just like, people spend so much time on creating the perfect song and then no time on the cover art, and people do judge things by the cover.
Just make it an expression of like the excellence of what you're doing. Simple. 2 color bars. Totally fine. Better than like a weird drawing. Good drawing, great. That's up to you to decide.
Okay.
But so, get that distributed, and whatever kind of marketing you're going to be doing, if you're going to be doing shows, whatever, like do that stuff. But first, get your song out there, get your music out there. There's a lot of people who once you like release the music will try to like get your money and just like try to avoid them. The good thing about publishing is that it's not as time sensitive. So, anyone who's ever been a recording artist who worked in the music industry knows it's like release date is the day, right? And it used to be on Tuesdays in the US and Fridays in the rest of the world, which was a living nightmare. Now it's Fridays everywhere. So release date is a day. That's when the clock is counting down to release date. You're starting 8 months ahead if you want your vinyl in stores, right?
Yeah.
With publishing, it's like you can usually back collect for a couple of years. So, release your song and then like one day when you're just like chilling, like having a beer, having a hot cocoa, depending on your climate, just like type your stuff in there, get your data right. Make sure you have all of the data before you enter it. You don't have to hurry. Like you should do it. Like do it within 6 months, but you won't lose money if you don't get your songs registered like with your PRO, with your administrator on street date, for example. Whereas, when you're talking about distribution, you have to get all that stuff correct for it to come out on time. But with publishing, it's a little more relaxed.
Okay, all right. That's good to know that in the kind of manic time before release, you don't really have to be worrying about this. And you can come back to it.
Yes.
All right. And then when you were saying to register it with your kind of, well, I guess from the conversation we just had, it sounds like you could need to register it with a lot of different people and a lot of different organizations potentially.
Yes.
Or if you, for example, if you were to use Songtrust, then would that be like one place and then you really don't have to do anything else?
Yes. I mean, you have to,
Okay.
get signed up with your PRO as a writer. You can actually do that on the Songtrust site for some PROs. It's good
Okay.
to be with your local society. For example, like in Australia, you'd want to sign up with APRA if you think that's where kind of the majority of your revenue is going to come from. And we don't have that affiliation on our site. So we always recommend make sure you're signed up with your local society if possible. And yeah, just register your songs and then we send them out everywhere, including your local society. So you just do it one time. And then,
Okay.
we then kind of, with our little pipelines, send it out using technology.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes things a lot simpler.
That is the idea.
Without, yeah,
Yeah.
without kind of thinking about too many things. And if you were to do it in that way, so you just signed up with your PRO and registered it with Songtrust, then what part of the pie would you lose out on? Or I guess what's the fee for Songtrust?
So the standard fee for Songtrust is 15% of everything we collect. And that's 100%. Like in some cases, you'll see people have different royalty rates for different types of royalties. Like some will charge more for like ex-US, or some will charge more for retroactive collections, which is anything that was earned before you started up with that publisher, or there are different, or mechanical performance differently, but we just like keep it easy. It's 15%. We have a one-time registration fee that's $100. And the reason that we charge that is because a lot of our work is done up front. Like if you come and you register, 100 songs, we're immediately going to start sending those out to everyone. If there are any conflicts, if you had a, prior admin, if your co-writer put in the wrong splits, like we see this stuff, this is all that happens 100% of the time. So dealing with conflicts and dealing with like data issues and all that stuff, that all happens at the beginning before there are any royalties. So in order to just like make sure, since everyone can sign up for Songtrust, it's like, we're at least covering our costs pretty much. If you never make any royalties on the back end, we've like done all the work of registering your catalog. You can leave in 12 months, but we get like just that like insurance policy because all the work is done up front. And you'll see like some distributors have similar models, like they'll do a fee plus a rate, or they'll do just a rate or just a fee. Like it kind of depends on the different types of work that all these artist services companies are doing. Okay.
And that 15% is only for the composition, right?
Yes, it is.
Isn't it? So
because we're only collecting composition. So we're collecting mechanical royalties and performance royalties.
Okay.
And that's it.
Cool.
And the rest of it you have to take care of. You have to go to your distributor, get distributed, sign with a label, do whatever you want. But the composition is always its kind of own thing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what would you say are the most common misconceptions that musicians have about their rights and music publishing?
I would say a very common one is that they don't need to deal with it and it will all be fine because it's not very much money, which is fine until like your song gets big, and then, you got to make sure you get that laced up. I think, one thing that we see a lot is that people feel awkward about especially in the studio. And I don't know if you've encountered this, but I'm sure some of your listeners have. People feel awkward in the studio talking about songwriting splits. And nobody wants to be like the person who like brings out the like split sheet for everyone to sign. Like, we just had this amazing creative experience and we wrote this great song together. And now like, let's just like get this on paper. It makes people feel uncomfortable. But it will make you feel way more uncomfortable if it turns out that, the song gets big and you guys didn't sort this out. It gets way worse after you release the song if you wait to sort out your splits, because that's when, once there's money involved, like everyone gets mad. Lawyers get paid, people get mad. So just, if there is one takeaway, it is like, try to get your split sheet signed when you leave the studio, or when you like leave the kind of virtual, creative space, whatever your kind of creative platform is, because it will just save you agita later. And then I would say the other thing is that people just think that publishing and songwrites and rights management are too hard, and they won't be able to understand them. And so they either ignore them and hope they go away, which they do not, or they'll sign a deal with someone like maybe earlier in their career before they have a lot of leverage, because they just don't want to think about it. But the thing is, it's really not that hard. You use a pie metaphor. If you can use a pie metaphor to understand anything, like someone who can write a song, which is a magical art that I can't comprehend, like you can understand like your rights as a songwriter. It's just people get afraid and they think they won't get it, but they can.
Yeah.
It's doable.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. No, I do believe that. I feel like after this conversation, which is great, it is doable. So that's good. And just kind of taking this to the producer's side.
Sure.
So if you were just producing for an artist, and I guess production now has become such a creative thing. How do you go about approaching, if you get a share of the songwriting credit?
Well, it's really interesting because like I come from, like I mentioned, kind of like the indie rock background, where it really was more common for the producer to be way more hands off, and like maybe they get points at most, right? Famously, Steve Albini said, "I'll never do a points deal," and Nirvana, and he didn't get points, I don't think. But it's
just before you go into that,
sorry.
Anna. So when you say get points, what does that mean?
So traditionally, especially in the more hands-off kind of like traditional producer engineer landscape, where it's not as much of co-songwriting, the producer would get a few percentage points of the master rights. So you sell $100,000 worth of records, they get $2,000, let's say.
Right. Okay.
But like you're saying, and I'm sure a lot of the folks who are in the organization, like production is so much more when it comes to like pop and R&B and hip hop and like even rock. Like, if you look at a record like the Casey Musgraves record, Golden Hour, like a country rock record, like that is such a producer led record in so many ways. Like her songs are great, but the production is so much of it. So it makes sense for people to get songwriting credit. It's not an easy conversation to have, but try to have it before you start. When you're if you're signing a contract, that's an easy time to do it. But obviously it might vary song to song. It's rare for someone kind of early career to be able to say like, I'm a producer, I get 10% of every song I'm involved in. It's more going to be sorted out on a song by song level. But you have to make sure that they're open to that, and make sure that you're asserting your rights, mentioning the split sheets, doing it as soon as you can, because there is just so much potential for drama down the line, and legal troubles, and just the biggest of hassles. But it feels like an awkward conversation, but it's like, up front when you're saying, I want you to produce this song. Okay, great. Here's what I would like to talk about. Try to do it as soon as possible before you're like feeling this like intimate creative relationship with someone. You're just kind of like, that's the prenuptial agreement.
Yeah. That sounds like a great idea. And when you said that they could ask for some points on the of the copyright, is that of the recording or the composition, for one? And what's a reasonable amount to ask for, or does that completely depend?
It totally varies. If you're doing points on the master, it's sometimes going to be paid by the label, and it's sometimes going to be paid by the artist out of their recoupment. It's usually like 2. I don't know, but maybe if you're very famous, it's 5. Like all the deals that I've ever done were like 1 to 3, but also we're talking about like kind of smaller potatoes in the grand scheme of things. But that's on the master side, and that's assuming that record is going to sell, right?
Yes.
But if you get songwriting share because you have been like a creative contributor to the actual composition, you know, you get paid if there's a sync license, you get paid for radio play, you get paid for all the sales as well, but it's also something that you kind of like own forever. So in 20 years, if there's, you know, whatever the new social media platform is, will it be like coming out of our eyeballs? I don't know. I cannot imagine. But, you know, whatever 20 years from now's TikTok is, if you have a sudden weird hit from your song that you produced 20 years ago, you will get those royalties. But if you only get the kind of recording side, you have a lot less opportunity to benefit on the kind of song that you wrote, you know, going places.
Right. Okay.
Both is great.
All right.
I would say get both
Both
if
is
you
great.
can. It's just like, just leverage as much as you can. But obviously, it depends on your leverage, right?
Yes. Yeah, of course. Cool. But I guess the composition rights, if you've been involved in the creative process, makes more sense to me than recording rights is sort of like a, you know, you can get it if you can, but you're not really entitled to it. Is that the right way to put it?
Sure. I think the reason that people historically have given recording rights to producers and engineers is that they're literally recording it, right?
Yeah.
And if you're just like placing mics, I know that that's very reductive. If you're like placing mics, miking the drum kit, like sitting in the controls, doing the levels without being a part of that creative process, like then it totally makes sense to just get your kind of fee and then maybe some points on the recording side, because that's really all you're contributing. And if you have people just in the studio kind of, you know, they come fully formed, they've got their song, they've got their arrangement, they've got everything. And that's, you know, that's absolutely a type of record producing. It's really more like engineering. But if you're, you know, creating the beat, if you're writing the hook or you're contributing to the hook, you know, it's so much more of a kind of like all in creative process, depending on the genre, depending on the people. But yeah, it absolutely does make sense to make sure that you're getting those songwriting shares if you can, you know?
Yeah. But yeah, that's been incredibly useful. Thank you, Anna. I think I've heard this being spoken about in multiple different formats. But I think it's been the most clear in my head after this conversation. So that's been great. Thank you.
It always helps to see a diagram too. So I recommend, like, our website has tons of diagrams of all of the different ways that your song breaks down, all of your different rights as a songwriter, as a, you know, recording owner, all that stuff. You can always check that out. There's also, you know, other websites with those types of resources that, like, if you can see the physical picture, it really helps.
Definitely. I'm definitely a visual person, so I think that would be really helpful. So I might actually get a link to whichever one that you think is the most relevant and put that in the show notes for anyone who wants to refer back to that. So thank you, Anna. It's really great and really helpful for me, and I'm sure for our audience as well. So yeah, it's been lovely having you. I will leave you to the rest of your day.
Thank you. Evening. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.